What's up, everybody? It's Ian here with Miller Garage, and we are continuing the Airstream coffee shop build, and it is a blazing hot day here in Texas. This week it's been over 100 every day. It's only, I think, like 11 in the morning, and we're already pretty close to 100 degrees. It's supposed to be 105. Luckily, later on this week it's going to cool down a little bit, so that's going to be great. I do have an awesome little portable AC unit in here that is helping so much, so if you hear kind of a humming in the background, that's what it is. But today we are gonna work on building these segmented end caps for the Airstream. This model, like a lot of the 70s Airstreams, came with that plastic end cap that went here, and like many of them, and on ours, all of the places where it was riveted had been cracked. It had some cracks that went pretty far up, and to be honest, I just think that I don't like the way they look. I don't like that cabinet up there. The only way that really will fit your build is if you are, retaining the other overhead cabinets, because it matches that. If you're doing anything different than that, it just looks out of place and outdated. So we are doing the segmented aluminum end caps. I've already been working on this side, and then I fully built the rear one. I wanted to get that one done first because it's in the rear, so it's not going to be as visible. So that's kind of the one that I learned on a little bit, and that turned out looking amazing. And so I wanted to do this video to show you guys how to build these. It is, I don't want to say it's a straightforward process, but it is pretty in-depth. There's some skill involved with it. It's a little bit more complicated of a process, and it requires some special tools that you probably have if you're doing an Airstream build, but you never know. So first of all, we're going to go over kind of what you need, and then we're going to dive into the process. So as far as tools go, you're going to obviously need a drill and whatever size bit that you're going to use as far as rivets go. I know some people, I've seen people that have used Olympic rivets. I've seen people that have actually buck riveted these completely. I think that would be cool, but at the same time, that's a lot of taking it on and off. And I don't know, to me, it'd feel like it'd be hard to get it to then, if you pull it off, you may lose the shape. So that could be tricky, but feel free to go ahead. I'm using an 1/8 inch because I got 1/8 inch pop rivets that I'm using. And you're going to need a whole ton of Clecos, because with this you want to make sure that you have it totally flush and everything good. You want to make sure that everything is flush and lined up right before you start riveting. So I have, like 150, 200 Clecos, obviously Cleco pliers for those. Measuring device. I have this flexible one because then I can kind of move it around, like have it be flush with the curve versus a tape measure. And this is like a nylon, and so I can put it on the aluminum without risk of scratching. Because if you're going to keep yours bare, that's one thing you really want to look out for, is scratching it. Then you're going to need a Sharpie to mark stuff. I use it to mark all the rivet holes as well as to mark where the panels are going to sit. And I use some gloves. These are like really thick 8mm gloves that I got from Harbor Freight, because I have found that fingerprints and sweat, when it gets on the aluminum, it stays on there. And I mean, you can clean it off. I have a Zephyr's Pro 50 Eliminator or something like that. It's a corrosion remover, but that sweat I've found actually will corrode the bare aluminum, and so I'm wearing gloves just to prevent that, to keep the aluminum clean whenever I'm holding it up there and putting it in place. And I don't have it in here, but I have a rivet gun, a pneumatic rivet gun. We'll be using that later. Like I said, we're fitting everything first. The riveting is the last thing whenever you're sure that it's all sized out right. I had all my aluminum cut at a metal place where I got the metal at metal supermarkets. They just use a brake shear to cut that off, and so it's perfectly sized. The edge is perfectly straight, and I would suggest doing that. I think they charged like maybe $1 per cut or something crazy low like that. I know some places charge more, but it really only ended up adding $10 onto the total cost, because I just got a 48-inch wide, a 4x10-foot sheet of aluminum, and then had them cut it into segments. And so that's what I would do. You can cut it with a shear. You will need some shears to cut the excess off whenever you get them in, because we place them in, and then you got to trim some of the excess off around the windows and whatnot. So you will need some shears and maybe a pair of air nibblers. All of those are something you're probably going to need anyway with an Airstream, so tools you may already have. So then supplies, aluminum obviously, and I'm using 50-54 aluminum, and this is 040 wall, so 0.040 inches, and they are cut into 11.5-inch wide segments, and the total length is 48 inches, because I just got the 4x10-foot, and then they cut them at the shop for me. So you need a total of 10 of those, and then I've seen some people do like the final middle section, just 11 inches. You know, I think it works out to still use the 11.5. I mean, you can kind of measure yours and figure out however you want to do it. In the back, I think it looks fine with that. That's what I did back there, so that's what I'm going to do up here. So essentially you need 11 pieces per side, so a total of 22. And you can get that out of 2 of the 4x10 sheets, and I think it was about $250 total in aluminum for these. So you know, aluminum's not necessarily cheap, but you know, it's not gold, so. And then you also need foam blocks for spacing out. So these are basically just to make sure that the aluminum doesn't, like, you know, it gives it structure behind it to secure against. So you're not riveting into these, but it keeps the form of the metal. And I got a 2-inch thick sheet of foam board, and then I cut 1 3/4 inch blocks out of it, like strips essentially, and then just chopped them up into these little blocks, and then you glue these all up on there. And I have found that the 3M high strength 90 contact adhesive spray is the stuff to use. This stuff works great. I've used it for all of my insulation work to adhere the insulation to the walls or the skins before I put them up, and then it works great for this as well. So that is actually the first step, so we're going to get started there. And basically, you don't have to, you know, there's no real rhyme or reason to this. I'm basically just kind of putting them in wherever. If you want to have them be all neatly spaced, that's fine. I'm just kind of doing it randomly. I feel like that'll create a better, you know, surface for it to push back on. All right, and so once you get those in there, the next thing you're going to do is put the insulation up in there. And I'm using just rock wool insulation. That's what I've used throughout the trailer, and it's great because you can kind of cut it into segments and tear it and just kind of shove it in between the blocks. That way you'll have insulation. You don't want to just, you know, necessarily leave it open. I mean, it's providing a little bit, and you have an air gap, but it's probably not going to insulate it as good as you want if you leave it like that. So we're going to get that and put all that in there. I got to move this stuff out of the way, especially my coffee. Really don't want to get rock wool in there, because that would be pretty horrible to drink that stuff. This is another essential ingredient for this project is coffee, since it is a mobile coffee shop after all. Now that we've got the insulation in, the next step is going to be to begin putting the segments up in there. So this is where measuring is really important. So since we already got this side in, I'm going to measure the distance from the ground to where that one starts, and then we're going to start there. And that should then mirror what it looks like over here. In the back, I measured the panel segment, spacing on the outside, but I wasn't quite as diligent on the inside, or rather, like, I measured this part really well, but I didn't measure the spacing, down here, and so it didn't turn out perfectly spaced. I mean, it still looks really great, but on the bottom it's not quite as spaced, so I'm doing a better job of that on this. It's still hard to get it exact just because they're going to fall in a certain place, and so they'll generally mirror each other pretty well, but they may not be perfectly spaced on the bottom. So we're going to start. I'm going to get the measurement of this, we're going to mark it, and then begin placing that first panel. This is where you want to be really careful and not scratch the aluminum. So one thing that helps is generally whenever you buy aluminum, it comes with some protective plastic on it. So you're going to want to leave that on there because that can help prevent scratches. Also, getting good quality aluminum where the cut is really good. Sometimes if the cut has, like barbs or anything on it, then that can be a problem, as well as any bent corners can scratch really easily. So just make sure you have good aluminum. So we're going to measure, and then we're going to start putting that in place. It can be helpful if you have somebody who can be a second set of hands to help you with this, because it is kind of tricky to get it in place. I got my drill close by, and I got the Cleco in my back pocket ready to go. And so whenever you put it up there, the bottom edge it's not going to be straight, obviously, because you got a curve, so it bends down a little bit, and that's totally fine. The big thing is you want this outside edge here to be even and straight, and so then you can kind of adjust where it lies based on that. I put one screw in or one rivet in hole and Cleco in first, and then you can kind of adjust from there. Just be really careful not to scratch, obviously. All right, so we got it in, and I have it clamped because first thing we're going to need to do is cut this to be even with that, because otherwise, you know, obviously you see it curves down dramatically. So we're gonna mark this and then cut it. So I kind of, you know, start marking some places, and then I'll actually use just a piece of scrap aluminum to kind of, you know, stick it in where that curve is going to be. And that looks pretty straight, and so whenever I go to cut it, I have this marked here pretty much even with the frame here, because this goes along and it matches this window opening. Now, the initial time I cut, I go, you know, about a 1/4 inch under this, because what's going to happen is when this piece is removed, this is going to move in a little closer to the wall. And so it may, I mean, you may even want to start, you know, 1/2 inch to a 1/4 inch below that line that you have marked, because when that comes in, it's going to obviously come in and it's going to bring it up a little bit. So it'll bring the whole piece in more flush. So you want to come underneath that. So we're going to pull it out, we're going to cut it with some electric shears, and then we're going to bring it back in and see how it fits and if we need to do any more trimming. This first piece is kind of, it's one of the more tricky pieces because it kind of sets the initial, you know, the base on it. And so you got to get this one right or the whole thing might be off. So this one's pretty much the most critical piece. So you got to get it measured right. And I have this initial line over here, and I'm actually going to make a line even with this, because this piece needs to come down and attach actually on the window below here, the large front window. So you're going to basically cut and it'll notch. Okay, so now we're going to see how it looks. So that's pretty close. I got to trim it a little bit more right here. Because the other thing that kind of happens is that this end kind of comes down a little more, which is fine because you're going to have more that they all overlap. So if you're a little off on this side initially, it's not a huge deal. And there you have it. So now that we got the piece fitted, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull it back out and I'm going to mark all the rivet holes going up and down, and I'm spacing them about 2 inches apart. That's what it is everywhere else, and that'll keep it really, you know, really tight so you don't have any gaps that can form in the panels, because that's one thing that can happen whenever you're doing something like this is if you kind of misalign something, you might get those little gaps in between the panels and stuff, and so we don't want that. So we're going to pull it off. I'm going to do that, and we're going to pull the plastic off, and then it'll be ready to not be riveted in, but we'll drill the holes, we'll get it clecoed in place, and then as long as everything else lines up right, then that piece will be in there and good to go. I'm going to take a file and clean up that lower edge a little bit as well, just so that it doesn't look like it's got any shards. Sometimes whenever you're cutting with the shears, especially doing a turn like that, it can get a little off. So this first piece is cut, and I got the plastic taken off. Where I marked all of the rivet holes, I don't know if you can see it, it's kind of hard to see, but I put just little, I started to drill, I didn't fully drill through, and so that's where it's marked for drilling. And now that we got the plastic off of it, we got to be really careful with the piece so we don't scratch it or get fingerprints on it and stuff. Again, the fingerprints can be cleaned off. That's not the end of the world, but it just, a little bit less work to do in the long run. So I'm going to cleco the first 2 spots back in there, and then we're just going to start drilling and putting clecos in and moving our way across just to get it flush. You don't want to like drill some over here and then put in here and then there and there, because then a lot of times it won't line up right. So you really want to go, move this way across, constantly keeping pressure on it to where it's as flush as possible. And this cleco is going to come out because the next piece that overlaps is going to go there. So once I get like 1 or 2 of these in, I'm going to pull that one, and that'll also, there's a potential that could be, that looks like it's pretty good regardless, but sometimes if you put one up here, then this part right here is a little off. So let me get my drill. Clecos are close by. Okay, so now that we're ready, we're just gonna push that into place. And I'm really concerned about just where the next rivet here is. So we're just gonna start drilling. And you really want to drill cleco. Whenever you get to some of the ones that have, they're a little bit more in, you can do a couple, but you don't want to just start drilling down the line. You want to do it 1 cleco at a time. Otherwise, again, you might get alignment issues. And this is why you need a whole bunch of clecos. And another thing you want to always be aware of whenever you're drilling into walls and skins and stuff like that is your wires behind. I have the wires covered by the insulation, but I know where they are. There's a line that runs right here. So whenever I get to that point, I'm going to be really careful. And you just want to try to keep it from going in too deep, and just be really aware whenever you're doing that. So the last thing you want to do is cut into a wire and then have that sporadic short that can be a nightmare, because then you got to pull stuff off, and just not something you want to deal with. So this is why we use clecos and do everything, kind of slowly and make sure it all fits right. So as this curve sucked into the wall as I'm clecoing it in, I notice that right here, there's still a little too much overhanging underneath, because like it's flush right here, but then when I get to about here, we got about a 1/2 inch, and so I need to mark that. So I'm only going to put a cleco into about here, and then we'll mark that and make that additional cut to kind of straighten that piece out. And then we will continue moving forward. So that's the thing. You just take your time, do lots of test fitting, because you're probably going to need to do quite a bit of trimming, especially on this bottom one, because again, this is the one that kind of sets the pace for everything. So you know, don't get in a hurry and start riveting stuff in, certainly. So. So this definitely is a long and involved process. I would say each end cap takes about 10 to 12 hours. That's about how long it's taking me. So it's definitely a time-consuming project, and it involves definitely some skill and some intricacy. So, but the results are amazing, and you know, if you're wanting something that looks great like this is a great way to do it. Also, if you really like the look but you just don't necessarily want to do it, I am taking on more Airstream projects, so this is definitely something that I can do if you're looking to have done to your Airstream, so you can always reach out to us. Email and everything is below, so feel free to reach out to us anyway through those or through our social channels. And the first segment is in. So I would say this is probably the hardest one. Once you get this one in, everything else is quite a bit easier. The biggest thing on moving forward is just getting them measured and aligned right. So I'm gonna take a short break and get some food, do a little shopping. We gotta go to Costco, because when you have a big family, that's the best place to go. So we're gonna continue this in just a second. With the first piece in, we're basically just going to layer them going all the way up to the top, and this is where measuring is really important. So I've found that the distance from the bottom of the panel up to the next one is about 10 to 10.5 inches. Probably, you know, you're going to need to measure, because you know where you place everything, it's all going to be slightly different depending on where it goes, but you're basically going to want to measure, you know, measure the total distance, and then you'll subtract the middle segment, half of that, and then divide the remaining distance by 5, and that'll tell you how far apart that they need to be. So, and then on the inside, again, they kind of lay a certain way once you have them here, and so you can kind of get like 1 to 2 in there, and then measure roughly how far apart they are and try to finagle it to where it fits in that. There's a bright spot coming in from the skylight, unfortunately. All right, so that piece is positioned. You always want to make sure that these are lined up straight. I have been measuring off of this, but I think this piece it's, you know, sometimes stuff kind of doesn't always get 100% straight. I think this one's maybe angled just slightly, or, you know, whenever you have curves, you're always dealing with that. But this is now straight and even, and there's a similar gap between here and here, as well as on this side, which that's what we're wanting to go for, is to make it look uniform. The same distance here, 10.5 is roughly where I'm at. And so we got that one positioned. Now, again, one of the great things about this is you're always drilling, you know, essentially into the top piece, and so I had to put multiple holes over here on this side, but you can always adjust that because that's just going to be covered up. Now obviously you don't want to just go crazy and put millions of holes, but always know, roughly, sometimes like these far corners are over here are going to be covered up, and so that's not a huge deal if you have a few extra holes there, and it's just the main areas that you want to be really careful about. So we got it in position, so then I'm going to just do the same thing I did on this one and put clecos in. We're going to have to trim this as well, but I want to get it drilled in position just so we have it 100% where it needs to be to make our cut. All right, and then we just basically continue with that same process, moving our way all the way up. So we're gonna add 3 more pieces here, and then once those are all positioned, I'm gonna be, I think it's the 3rd one. So the one after this, I'm gonna be putting a hole for a light, like I did over here, and I'm gonna have just those little LED lights in that. But then when we get up to the top, then the main one kind of comes down, but with that one, I'm going to go back and rivet everything before finishing that last piece. That's what I did in the back, and that seemed to work out. So I'm just going to do this, knock it out, and then we'll finish it up with that center piece for it, and then rivet it all together, and it'll be pretty much done from there. This obviously, like I said, it's a time-consuming thing. It's a lot of fun. I actually really enjoy doing this kind of stuff, so I'm enjoying this part of it. Now that I have all of these segments clecoed in, the last step as far as getting them in and fitted is to put the centerpiece that overlaps both sides. So for this, I basically did the same thing and put drill marks on both sides now instead of just one side, as well as the top end. So I have it measured and centered up to where where it needs to be positioned for both the top and the bottom. So you basically just measure where the center is and do math and get it centered up. So make sure you do that, because you don't want it off center, because then that would look weird, and then you'd have a bunch of holes that you'd have to change, and that would be problematic. So this one you need to be very careful, because you can't do a heck of a lot of shifting once you get it in there. So make sure you measure and you make sure that it's squared up and straight and all that, because then it would look kind of funky. So I'm just gonna position it up in there, get it in place, and then start drilling and clecoing to get it positioned. From there, it's pretty simple. We're just gonna rivet everything in. Measure first, make sure everything's good, and then just rivet it all together. So now I'm gonna get this knocked out. And now all of the segments are in, and they're clecoed in. I've also begun riveting in these sections. I had to actually free up some more clecos to use for the for the last centerpiece, so I had to pull some of those out. Whenever I go to rivet them, I basically just pull out every other cleco and then put a rivet in. So I'm using just 1/8 inch aluminum pop rivets. Like I said, I've seen people use some other stuff like Olympics if they want that kind of the same look that you got going on outside. But then, you know, your cost is going to be a lot higher and you need a shaver for that. So that's another option, but we're going with this. And I also have some lights in here. Those are just the 12 volt little clip-in ones, and that's what's going to be all of the interior house lights. I'm going to just finish off riveting it, and that's pretty much the last thing. So, you know, it's looking really awesome. Everything looks really symmetrical and even, and that is the goal. So I'm going to get the shears, knock that out, and then rivet the rest of it back together. And here is the finished product. I think this just looks so cool. I love just the sheet metal look. It's just using the bare aluminum. Initially we were talking about painting it, but we decided in the front area and like the front and rear end caps, we're gonna keep just the bare aluminum. I just think it looks so amazing. So I'm super excited with how this turned out. I'd love to do more, so if you are interested in having this done to your Airstream, just reach out and you can contact me. There's contact information below, or leave a comment or whatever you want to do. Thank you so much for watching. I would ask you, if you liked this video, please subscribe to our channel. If you're new to this channel and this is your first time watching, I would love it if you would follow along on the journey. We have more projects coming. You know, we're gonna have more Airstreams in the future for sure. So, you know, there's gonna be more of that, and we got a lot of other cool stuff coming. So follow along, it's gonna be great. Also, our social channels are listed below as well, so you can check us out there. I'm gonna start really trying to get Instagram going better, so expect to see more there. And hope you enjoyed, and we will see you next week.